everyone. Welcome back to the Going Scared podcast. This is your host, Jessica Honegger, founder of the social impact fashion brand Noonday Collection. Join me here every week for conversations on living lives of purpose by leaving comfort and going scared. Well, thanks for all of you guys who sent well wishes to Texans. It has been a true crisis that we've been in. Who knew that a week-long snow and freeze would result in a huge energy and water crisis across our state? Thank you for all of those who've lent support, who've sent money. We are almost out of the woods and energy has been restored, and we are thankful to have come together during a crisis within a crisis. The other crisis I'm talking about is COVID-19, which I have not had just a straightforward kind of geeky scientific conversation about COVID-19 with you guys yet. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have Julia Cheek on the show. We are still in the middle of our Going Against the Grain series. And when I think of someone who is going against the grain, well, first of all, a female in the tech industry is unfortunately still considered going against the grain. That's still very much a male-dominated space. And Julia actually just received the largest series funding of any tech company in Austin ever, which is no small thing because we are a tech town. Julia Cheek, she is the CEO and founder of Everlywell. You might have heard of her from Shark Tank, and it is a consumer health testing company that provides innovative at-home kits and has really redesigned how consumers think about testing themselves for things like STDs, allergies, thyroid, you name it. Now, her organization really came on the radar this last year as we began to actually talk about testing, as testing has become a focal point. Julia and I have known each other for 3 years now, and she's been a game changer in this season of COVID testing that's really brought humanity to this industry and is really a people-centered in everything that Everlywell does. It's an inspiring and empowering conversation, if not just a little bit geeky, but come along with me because you might learn a thing or two that you might have not known before about diagnostic testing. Okay, so for those of us that have not seen your Shark Tank episode, why don't you give us the Everlywell elevator pitch?
Always love to start with Shark Tank. It was one of my most fun moments, but I did have a very well-prepared pitch there, 90 seconds. It is sometimes not quite as crisp anymore, not as produced, but Everlywell is based here in Austin, and we have several hundred people working to change people's lives through at-home lab testing. And this was a problem I faced about 5 years ago, and ultimately believed that all Americans needed access to affordable, accessible, digitally enabled tests, and started to work on that problem. And we've been solving it for the last 5 years, and obviously came into a new space in 2020, but it's been a problem that we have been deeply passionate about and driven around solving for people.
So tell me about, I know there's a personal story that went along with this, and I'm curious, before you landed on in-home lab testing, you're trying to solve, how did you arrive to in-home lab testing? And tell us a little bit about your personal health history. We're just going to get personal from the beginning.
Perfect.
Tell me your health history, Julia.
Absolutely. It's funny. I'm probably the number one user of our products. And so I'm constantly sharing lab results, all those kind of things. So not an issue here. So, I had wanted to be an entrepreneur for a number of years, and wanted in the sense that I felt like I had this deep need to try founding a company. But what I had not had was that inspirational moment or idea that I felt was worth all of the risk, all of the, years and years of hard work, often decades. And so for me, my personal experience around lab testing, I think really lit that fire. And I was working at a great corporate job in 2015, I honestly was probably suffering from burnout, and I didn't recognize it, just physical burnout from just having a tremendous amount of commitment to my job. And I was on a high deductible health plan. Probably, I think over half of Americans are on those now. They were a little more rare at the time. And so I started having probably something many, many women have been through, which is these kind of vague symptoms, very real symptoms, but sort of difficult to pinpoint on what they meant. So fatigue, significant aches and pains, brain fog, just a smattering of different issues. And so I started dutifully going from a primary care physician to being referred to different specialists to ultimately going to like rheumatologists, all those kind of specialties. And they all ran a bunch of lab tests. That is how specialists and physicians get the information they need to determine ultimately what's wrong with you. And those tests individually might not have been that expensive, but when you combine 7 or 8 specialty panels, you get no lab results, which is what happened to me. And then you end up getting these bills either toward your deductible or otherwise. I ended up with a really expensive problem and no results. And so I started looking into the space because I thought, gosh, I obviously couldn't foresee at the time how important this entire industry would be to all Americans. But what I could see was that women in my generation were suffering from this same problem, and they couldn't get the answers that they needed. And so I knew that there was enough here to where I could solve a major problem for my friends, for myself, for people that I cared about. And so that was really my personal story and how I got started, and how that started me off on this journey to really figure out how we could do things differently in testing. And, everyone always says, well, so what was wrong with you? Because I forget to share that part of the story. I ended up gathering all these paper lab results, taking them to a functional medicine doctor, and I was relatively normal. But I was really low in a bunch of different hormones and vitamins, including things like anemia, vitamin D, you name it, magnesium. And so after about a 3-month regimen, I felt a whole lot better. But that wasn't that hard of a problem to solve. And it was this entire odyssey for me, an expensive one that would have crippled most Americans from a debt standpoint. And yet ultimately was something that could have been solved in a much less expensive way. And so that to me was sort of the kind of deciding factor of there has got to be a better way to do this.
Okay. What are the tests that you first started off with?
So this was back in 2015. I had a lot to do, which was I had to hire a medical director. I needed to hire a regulatory counsel. I needed to find labs that wanted to work with us. I'm coming from the financial services space. I needed to really find all of the people who could help me in this new world, and one that was I knew that I was only representing the consumer, and I needed all the smart people in healthcare around me. So I solved that problem first. And then in the summer of 2016, we launched in beta with our first 3 tests with lab partnerships. And those were metabolism, fertility hormones, and food sensitivity. And so those 3 really represent, I think, different reasons of why people come to us. They want to feel better. They're trying to pinpoint issues. They want to make lifestyle changes. And our customer base has shifted a bit over the years, but those were the first 3 that we started with. And again, largely targeted towards the tests that I knew my generation wanted and that they were telling me that they needed.
Okay, this is sort of random, but so Julia and I are in a business group together. Full disclosure, we know way too much about each other. So I'm like, I don't know how to do this interview because I'm like, I know too much. So do I just keep it really surface level? But I remember you sharing you were a horse jumper. Is that right? What do you know? I don't know.
I was an equestrian.
You were an
horse
equestrian.
Jumper's fine, but yeah, that works too.
Oh, that's terrible.
I love it.
Okay, so you were an equestrian, and now you are the CEO of, one of the fastest growing brands. You were in Inc. magazine in April. You just received the most VC funding of any Austinite in history. And I'm just curious if you can correlate some of your, because you were a very competitive equestrian rider. How do I say that?
Yes.
Competitor.
Yes.
Is it okay? Okay. What are some of those things? Because you started this company very young. So I'm thinking about some of these key things that you did in your life. I know you got your Harvard MBA. And what are some of those key skill sets or maybe the practice of resilience that you had in your life that have led you to be able to continue to practice resilience in your current role?
I think being an equestrian and specifically some of the aspects of being a competitive athlete, the work required for that built a tremendous amount of resilience for me and maybe specifically around delayed gratification. And what I mean by that is I started riding horses when I was 8. I retired when I was 25. But as an 8-year-old, I was really, really bad for probably a decade. I didn't actually become competitive or a noteworthy competitor in equestrian sports until I was on the later half of my high school years. And I lost a lot. I would receive sportsmanship awards, the awards that they give when they feel really sorry for you.
Yeah.
And you have a really good attitude. And I just loved the sport. And so I spent about 10 years working really, really, really hard without any external validation. And I loved the sport. I took care of my horses. I trained. I spent a lot of my time away from the normal high school life and the normal college life doing equestrian sports. And I think that, I learned a lot about what it means to train for a few moments of competition. I also learned a lot about the fact that no matter how hard you work, ultimately you're partnering with a wild animal. And that some things are out of your control. And I had moments, when I retired one of my horses, he came up lame at the World Championships. I had to scratch. Years of work.
Wow.
To have to scratch. And I think that level of resilience and stoicism, mental stoicism, I think is something that I didn't realize I was building, but has had a tremendous influence on building and founding a startup and a company. And it has contributed to, I think, what's important to me and what I value. And I think allows me to be in this role that is, you've probably, you yourself seen and experienced that there's that chart that shows the emotions that a founder goes through every single day, right? All the extreme highs and lows. And I think it's really prepared me to weather that. And hopefully other things as well. But, that I think is the biggest parallel over the last few years.
Those are some good ones. Okay, you recently became a mom. Are you wanting him to do a sport for that reason?
Yes, although there's all, this when you have kids. I have an 18-month-old. You think about all the different opportunities that he may have, and what his gifts will be, what his interests will be, and so I do believe competitive sports builds great team dynamics, fundamentally teaches you about failure, teaches you about losing. I think that's actually way more important than winning and then success. So I'm hoping so, but I don't know if that's where his talents will be. So we'll see what happens. I think certainly being focused on something and having a something to work for is really important for kids.
So true. That can come through other things too. Okay, so I have to confess, when we first met each other, well, first of all, when we first met, Noonday was a few $1 million ahead of Everlywell, and now Everlywell's hundreds of millions of dollars ahead of Noonday, which is awesome, which is why I love being in our business group, because it just like raises my game all of the time. But when I first heard about your company, I felt very old school. Like I thought, oh no, I wouldn't trust myself to like do a lab at my house. And now, of course, COVID-19, I know, has helped change consumer behavior, but we've had Ali Webb of Dry Bar on here.
Yes.
And one of the things she talked about is, that like basically she's changed female behavior, right? Like it's like people now go get their hair blown out. That's a thing. And so when I was skeptical and I thought, I don't know if I would trust that. So how did you, at the beginning, when you think of the consumer, when you think of the obstacles that you had in the marketplace, how did you go about solving that problem? And then, of course, I would love to hear how you're seeing consumer behavior change now with COVID-19, and now lab testing is like an everyday conversation that we have now.
I know, unfortunately. So it's super interesting when you look at this space. And like, I know, listeners are probably not, at least prior to 2020, we're not like lab testing, super great conversation, really excited about it. But I think like, if you look at the broader context, it's actually incredibly important that we look at what's happening in testing. So for example, over 10 years, let's take 2008. How many people generally do you think would have been comfortable spitting in a tube and sending it in the mail somewhere? Probably not very many. And you look at companies like 23andMe that have actually radically transformed things we do in our everyday life that now seem normal. And I give them tremendous credit for a lot of things, but especially for that massive consumer behavior shift, where now there are hundreds of direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies. Hundreds. We don't do that service, but it's a normal crowded space. And they created that entire behavior at home. And then you actually think about things like glucose testing or HIV testing, or other types of hormone testing, even around pregnancy. These have all been done in the home for a long time. And yet, when we do surveys of the American population and you say, hey, what do you think of when you say at-home test? People say a pregnancy test or a DNA test. And so for me, this was actually an education problem more than anything else. These tests already existed. They are being performed by labs that are serving hospitals and physicians. And we're simply educating people, one, that they don't need to be getting unexplained high bills for tests, and we're going to tell them exactly how much they'll pay, not a penny more. Two, they can do this on their own time and in their own home. And then three, this is something that can be easy and actually delightful. I mean, what's been the most fun part about this is, can you imagine giving like a 5-star rating to like getting your blood drawn? Our NPS score is world class. It's above a 70, which means that people are actually delighted by the experience we're having. For our COVID test, our NPS is a 75. I mean, it's really amazing to watch when you see people who know how to speak with consumers and create that trust and loyalty, and see that translate in a space that mostly is likened to the DMV. Nobody has ever been excited about testing. And if we can change that behavior in the US, we think that there's incredible value to our healthcare system in doing that. So that was a lot, but.
No, it's good. So in this last year specifically, you guys have absolutely skyrocketed. Can you actually correlate a sort of this halo effect around now lab testing being a common everyday conversation to your company's growth?
Yeah. And this is what I love about getting to share a little bit more about what Everlywell has experienced as part of this broader shift. I'm sure every company that is performing services in the home around healthcare is seeing this. But COVID-19, while we have a testing product, is ultimately not our platform. In fact, I found it interesting when the media called our COVID-19 efforts a pivot, because I actually found it to be the North Star of like, we didn't even have any other decision to make, because we are here to provide access to consumers to affordable and easy to use testing. And so COVID-19 very easily fit in that framework. But we have always offered a number of other tests. We have 30 other tests, from hormones to STIs to diabetes, heart health, et cetera. And of our 30 tests, 90% of them are growing well north of 100% year over year. I mean, like 200, 300, 400%. And that is because we are now addressing a need that has, I don't believe is actually greater than it was before COVID, but there's an education level that's different. And so people, and then once they use the product, as I said, once you have this level of convenience and you're able to own your data and use it with your doctor, they tend to not revert back. And so for us, it's a trial. As with any consumer product and with a brand, you're just trying to get people to try the product. And then it's your job as a company to make sure that you deliver on the brand promise. And so that's what we work really, really hard to do with all these new people coming to our platform.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've done Everlywell COVID testing, and I would, any other I'm like, metabolism test. Jeez, I would love for that to show them something. Versus just the COVID-15. Okay, I wanted to ask you something that you said, actually, maybe we've been meeting for 3 years now, by the way, in a business group every month. So, but I remember at the beginning of your journey, and there's only 2 of us in our group that are bootstrapped. Everyone else is VC funded and really fast growing, and that's a new world to me because we've never pursued that route. And I remember you saying this is just like a really bad way for a founder to make money. Like you've had a lot to say about VC funding. You've had a critical eye about it. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that when I'm thinking about maybe some of our listeners are bootstrapping an idea right now. And, maybe they are dream about being on Shark Tank and then dream of pitching in, out in California. Like, what would you say are the would you have taken a different route if you could have?
Yeah, and I am a big fan of VC funding when it is the right business model. I think what's happened in sort of the broader zeitgeist media chatter is that being VC backed has become trendy. And as a founder, if you go out and raise VC money, that means you believe your business is on a very specific path with a 100x exit. And, you might land somewhere not there, but that is the purpose of why you would take venture capital money. And there are many, many ways to be an entrepreneur and a founder. There are many ways to grow a business. You're an exceptional example of that with Noonday and bootstrapping. And you really have to assess as a founder and for your business what your own growth path and goals are. And I think that founders are often quick to jump to VC money because it is the trendy thing to do. And so there are great outcomes to be had with VC funding, especially when your investors and your team and your board are aligned with your mission. But I think that there's the optionality of really selecting the best financing path for your business and for your personal goals. I think that's been lost. And so I'm really passionate about helping people think through what makes sense for them. Like ultimately, you're the founder and this is your life day in and day out. And so for us, I knew that this was the only path for Everlywell. Being a highly regulated digital health company, there was no path for me for bootstrapping. And I believed that this would be a very, very high growth sector and require quite a bit of money to scale and grow. And I was excited about that. But there's lots of other businesses that don't need VC money and that aren't a good fit for that. And I think it's just really important to be honest and authentic with yourself about that. And I think VCs can be great partners. They've seen so many patterns over the years. They're incredible advisors. But ultimately, my belief is actually nobody does a startup to try to make money. I think founders create startups because they have ideas and they run hard after visions and they run hard after missions. And they're really motivated by change and by changing the world. But I am just telling you, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but my belief is that being a founder is one of the hardest ways to make money. I think if that's your motivation, I would strongly encourage you to direct elsewhere because I think ultimately that may come as an outcome, but it is not a goal. The goal is to solve the problem and to change lives for your customers, and then go from there.
Well, and VCs aren't looking for, they can sniff that out. VCs are looking for exactly what you describe, people that are looking to change the world and are chasing a vision.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about going public. I noticed on your Instagram a couple weeks ago, you posted, what did you say, like 60, only 66 women have taken companies public?
I don't know the official stat. I think it was women who had founded companies and then also taken them public, but it was an abysmal number. I think it was in the single digits.
Okay, it was not even 66.
Right.
Maybe it was 6.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was, I think, published by Forbes. Just a really, really sad statistic.
And why do certain companies go public? And then what's the benefit of going public versus staying private?
Yeah, I was working at a public company supporting investor relations and corp dev at the time when I started Everlywell. And so was working for a female CEO, which was really exciting and kind of got an insider view early in my career of what that looks like. And I think that going public is just another choice of how to best think about financing strategies for your business. So what that means is you could raise private capital, you could talk to private equity firms, you could go public. I mean, these are all different options, and depending on your business, depending on market timing, depending on the current economic environment, any one of these might be more or less favorable at any one time. Obviously, there's a lot of interesting behavior going on in the public markets right now with, I guess, what people call retail trading. I would call it the Robinhood traders. And some of that will be really interesting to see what transforms over the next few months. But it is just one option. And I feel fortunate. I know a few female CEOs that have either taken companies public or currently run those companies. And so that is more for me, just something I would love to see happen more often. It is just a broader reflection, I think, of the challenges for female executives and women in the workforce overall.
How do the stakes change when a company goes public?
I think the stakes are different. I don't know that they're any higher or lower. I think they are different because what you are doing is making sure that you are accurately communicating forecasts, outlooks, numbers, quarterly numbers to analysts and to the market. That's not to say you don't have to do that anyway with your board or with whomever is backing you. But there's not that immediate reaction, and it's not necessarily done in 90-day increments. And so sometimes it can be harder for companies to innovate, to take really big risks when you do have a lot more compliance, disclosures, those kind of things in place. So it's a big decision for a company, certainly early stage companies, venture-backed companies, because it does add a lot more infrastructure, a lot more time, a lot more cost, just to be sure that you are doing everything right. And so I think those are some of the considerations as well for founders and CEOs.
Okay, I want you to, and I actually lived through you in real time, but I'm going to give you PTSD when I say to take us back to like the first 30 days of COVID-19 and deciding we're going to go into this space, we are going to create this. Like what was going on behind the scenes in America? Because you knew a lot more than just the average person.
Yeah, it was a really, I think the best word to use is important moment for our team, for our board. And it was one of those moments where you think that the people in charge have it handled and you suddenly find out they don't. And when I say people in charge, I mean the large testing companies, I mean the government, I mean the universities, I mean the CDC, I mean everyone who had a responsibility to have this solved. And I should have known as a founder that assuming that other people have things solved is generally not a good plan. So,
But
I
don't we
think
do that all the time?
we do.
Especially as women, we think like someone else is it. We never tag ourselves,
Yeah. Yeah. And we never sort of say, I mean, I laughed. I was asked this time, actually later, like mid-February last year, I was on a podcast and someone asked me if we were going to get into COVID testing, and I laughed.
Right.
I said, why would we do that? Like, we're a small startup. How can we make a difference? And I think if there's anything to take away from our learnings for everyone listening, it's that saying the question, like, I'm small, how can I make a difference? I wish I had never, I mean, that is so opposite of being a founder, right? And it was a moment of just not really being authentic to what I knew, which was you should never assume other people have it handled, and you should make sure that we were playing whatever role we could play. And so, look, we were a business going through all of the same challenges that every other business, every other person and family in America was going through, which was information around shutdowns, moving our workforce remote, trying to get us up to speed for that, and at the same time announcing and really driving towards being able to help our lab partners get COVID tests to market. And there was so much, both a lot of information and no information all at the same time. And trying to make decisions in that framework. And, at the time, my team was fully on board and driving, but, ultimately I have to make the calls on what we're going to do and what we're not. And I think, one of the biggest reflections I have from that time is that I actually was very calm, and I made decisions faster in that time frame than I ever have. And I say that because it was all very clear cut to me. And I was able to get rid of a lot of the morass around the decision making, because it was so easy to make decisions in our mission at that moment, to say, we should be here. We should be part of this. We can make a difference. We have a national infrastructure. We partner with great labs. The FDA has asked for support with their EUA framework. And so those were decisions that as a leader were actually very easy for me to make. That is not to say they weren't very risky. They certainly were risky, but they were easy. And I don't know what that says about me. I do know it says a lot about my team, which is that they were there and supportive and leading in every step of the way. And I couldn't have done it without that and without them. But it was actually some of the easier moments that I've had, albeit challenging moments more broadly for our team and for the company and for everyone.
How do you feel about the state of COVID-19 testing as it stands today?
Look, I am really excited about a lot of the innovations coming to market, some of which I have visibility to. I do think there is going to be a huge shift in COVID-19 testing within the next 6 months, which then will actually translate, hopefully, into a world where, my vision is that Americans have these little machines in their homes that can process everything from a flu test to a COVID test. And I mean little strips that you
that would
insert.
be amazing.
I mean, and there's 2 that are
Let's do
approved out
ear
there that are in
infections while we're
production.
at it.
I know. And I really believe that if we look for a silver lining here, it's that home point of care diagnostics, like pregnancy tests, will be available in the next 5 years across all kinds of things that people can test for. And, think about the infectious diseases we could contain if people knew if they were sick. Think about all of these different things. And so to me, that's actually really, really exciting. However, I do think we still have a long way to go in terms of getting enough people vaccinated. And I do think testing still matters. And I think it's still too hard to get, and too many people are not getting insurance reimbursement for it. And so those things to me still need to be addressed in conjunction with making sure that we're driving the vaccine rollout as much as possible. But it's been really inspiring to watch. I mean, we have a great distribution channel in which we get to share all of these incredible tests that are created with Americans and with the world. And that it's inspiring for me to get to see the process by which this vaccine was created, the process by which these scientists are getting these diagnostic products to market. Like, what a world we live in, that this is our opportunity to not have this persist and kill, and ideally, hopefully we can contain the death rate. Like, we should be so grateful for this moment, despite having so much hardship, that we have a path and that we had a vaccine to market in less than a year. I mean, it's really incredible.
It is. I've told you my brother-in-law is an infectious disease doctor and a
Yes.
researcher at Ohio State University, and he specializes in Hep C. But we were talking, and of course, we do so much work in Africa, and I just still see malaria killing people, and so many other diseases. And I was like, gosh, look what happened when the whole scientific community stopped and focused on this one thing. And he's, because he's just like, this is remarkable. I mean, he's been working on a Hep C vaccine for like 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And, and so it's so remarkable. But then he also pointed out, but like, think about all the things that are not getting the attention. And we were just talking about the power of attention, right? And I mean, as business owners too, we're always looking at what are we going to give attention to this year, because what you give attention to grows. What you give attention to is what is going to move the needle. So it's very important what you are paying attention to, what you are giving your attention to. And in this case, the entire scientific global community gave attention to a disease and actually found a vaccine in a record-breaking amount of time. And I'm like, can you do this? Can you go? I mean, HIV has made tons of strides, but still, we could still have go a little bit further to a vaccine. And then I believe malaria, it gives me, I just think, gosh, is that going to shift? Is this actually going to lead to further scientific breakthroughs in this area of these, more common diseases?
I mean, I 100% believe it will. I think there has been an unveiling of some of the brokenness of investment in testing, and then ideally investment in vaccines, right?
Okay, talk to us about that. Break it down. We're just the average person.
I think that it was this exact moment where we realized that for decades, the testing infrastructure, the pandemic response infrastructure. I read a really interesting article that said that there is a cadence in which we can predict pandemics, apparently, and that there had been a pandemic force created to try to monitor all this. Of course, those things, to your point, they're hard to give attention to because they don't matter until they happen.
Right.
But when they happen, they are then it's like, well, how come we weren't prepared for this? And so how do you still have structures in place, both in our businesses, I think, and more broadly in society, to at least be prepared to respond? And so I think that we have just we had attention away from, we've been quite insular in our American needs, which often don't include things like malaria, et cetera. I think we can do a lot more globally in global health to move those things forward. And then I think we as a country need to look at our infrastructure around testing, rollout programs of health needs like vaccines, et cetera. And this has probably given rise to a need for really, really looking at, are we prepared for a number of different health events, but specifically, how could we help people get healthier on a national level? So I'm hopeful in that sense, because we will be past this and then we will have all of this work done and all this infrastructure. I think it can be leveraged in some really amazing ways.
Okay, entrepreneurs basically get funded by predicting the future, right? We need to be able to predict the future and convince other people that you are predicting the future.
I'm not crazy.
So I'm curious, because I was thinking about 9/11 this week, and I was thinking about some of the permanent ways that 9/11 shifted America. But then I also was thinking about some of the ways that, we just eventually we move back to what is easy and what makes the most money, right? Like the human nature is that. So I'm curious, what do you think is going to, outside of the medical industry, which is what we've primarily been talking about, just curious. I'm curious, as someone who has been able to predict the future and is now running a huge company because of that. What do you think are the things that we're going to see like 10 years from now? We're going to say, yeah, it's because COVID-19.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of changes, mostly because, actually, to hit on your point, some of the things we've discovered during this year are easier and more productive, more efficient, make more money. So like, let's talk about working from home. You're not going to be able to compete in the talent market, I don't think, unless you have some sort of work from home strategy. That's radically different. And I think that that'll be a big shift to some degree. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the business travel, to the same degree, right? Everything will go back a little bit. I think that telehealth, I think the level of convenience of people to get care through a video appointment, I think that's going to be huge. And I think about all the people that could help that can't leave their homes or that are in rural communities. I think more broadly about how do we as a society use our time? I mean, I can't tell you how many people, myself included, I've probably worked harder this year than any other year, but I've also had more time with my family. I didn't know that those two things could exist together. And I think it's because of the interim periods of how much time we used to waste. And I'm not advocating that, you're overworking in every respect and then seeing your family more, but I do think there's a real change here. And I think it's dependent on us as a society on what we take from this, right? What we tolerate, what we let slip back into our habits, what we don't. And I'm hopeful that these are some permanent shifts because they've been positive. I'm already an introvert, so for me, it wasn't all that difficult, I'll be honest. But my husband is an extrovert, so it's been a bit of a challenge there for him. But, being really intentional about our choices and who we're spending time with and how, I think has benefited us.
We have this saying at Noonday, decide, don't slide. And so I've been thinking about that because really we will slide back into whatever unless we do decide what we're going to keep and what we're not going to keep. And, I think that that's a question that we, maybe not in the next 2 months, but, I think by the summer, we really need to be asking ourselves, what are we going to keep, and what are we not going to keep? Because, Noonday's based on physically getting together, thankfully in small groups, because I don't know if we're going back to huge groups for a long time, like hundreds. I mean, one of my friends that runs a global organization and, raises money during galas, and she's like, I don't think we're going to be doing that for another couple years. So they're having to just totally pivot their fundraising strategy.
Well, and this sounds trite, but I think about just habits we used to have, like past hors d'oeuvres.
Samples at the grocery store.
Samples at the grocery store at Whole Foods. I mean, goodness gracious. And so, how do those behaviors fundamentally change as well? School, childcare. I'm hoping we can take the good pieces of this and still evolve. But it certainly will be. I mean, I was in business school in 2009 through 2011. And we focused a lot of our time in business school at that time on the Great Recession. How did this happen? What were the dynamics that led to this? How are the American people impacted? And it had a really big mark on how I viewed the world, how I viewed people that I thought were in charge. You can hear a lot of those themes in this conversation, right? And I feel like we have another opportunity here to similarly think differently, and it'll be, multi-generational impact for sure.
Do you think we're going to be wearing masks in the fall?
I do.
I do. Come on.
I do. I think, they're
not stupid, by the way, everyone. I am a mask wearing person, but yes, I'm looking forward to the day
you don't have to wear one. It's really impacted my coffee consumption because I used to casually drink my coffee over several hours, and now if I'm in our lab or otherwise, I'm like, man, this is but small price to pay for something that works so well. So I do. Here's why. I'm not a physician, but I've heard physicians talk about this, so I hope I represent it correctly, which is, even though you are vaccinated, there is, I think, data showing that you can still get someone else.
Don't get me in trouble, Jessica. When do you think the 70%
and so I think
will happen?
Until we get to a herd immunity status, I think Dr. Fauci said 70% vaccination. I think the masks are here to stay for quite a while. But hopefully we can get to a happy medium where a lot of the economy and a lot of the activities open back up. And then eventually, we can remove the masks. Oh gosh. Oh goodness. Well, I think the administration is making a lot of moves to rapidly expand vaccine distribution. I think the states are doing a better job, but we're still really, really behind. And so I think it maybe by the fall, I'm hopeful. I also would say there's, still trepidation around the vaccine. And so I think community education is so important. And I think that, we may have masks around for another year or so, maybe longer. It'll all depend on vaccines and how careful people are when they are potentially sick.
There's this concept called the bystander effect, and it's this sociological phenomenon that the more people that are present during a crisis, the less likely that someone will step forward and help that person in crisis. And so even as Julia was sharing, she literally laughed out loud when she did a podcast a year ago and someone asked if she was going to get into this COVID-19 testing space because she felt like small potatoes. And she thought, I'm small. How can I actually make a difference? And how that thinking is so opposite of what being a founder is really about, seeing the impossible and going after what no one thinks that they are capable of. But I'm so thankful that Julia chose to honor the conversation and to revisit that question that she was asked, and has chosen action over inaction and became the first in-home COVID test to enter the market. I have utilized them and was very grateful for them at the time. So I want to leave you with this question. What conversation could you honor, could you revisit when you catch yourself sliding into smallness, or that your presence actually doesn't make a difference? I'm going to leave you with that today. To learn more about Julia and Everlywell, go and take a test at everlywell.com. And don't forget to review and rate this podcast because it helps other people find the show. Our wonderful music for today's show is by my good friend Ellie Holcomb. Going Scared is produced by Eddie Kolpoltz. And I'm Jessica Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.